Hello and welcome to Solving the IT Lifecycle Problem with Hyper-Convergence. My name is David Davis and I'll be your moderator for the event. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We've got a great webinar lined up for today. Before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about myself and my co-presenter today. Again, my name is David M. Davis. I'm the co-founder at ActualTech Media. I'm a VMware vExpert, author, blogger, speaker, and I've created a lot of video training courses at pluralsight.com. I'm also a former IT manager where I had a very successful server virtualization project over the years and have gained a lot of experience in the data center and with virtualization through that. I'm proud to be joined by Mr. Arjun Narang. He's the technical marketing engineer from Maxta. He has been in the IT industry now many years, and he has a ton of experience in hyperconvergence. He joined Maxta a couple years back and was formerly at VMware prior to joining Maxta. He has a lot of experience in automation, the VMware vCloud suite, storage, and he's going to be our resident hyperconvergence expert today, and we have a lot of great content lined up about the IT lifecycle, hyperconvergence, and really where the two meet and how the two can and how the IT lifecycle can benefit from hyperconvergence. We also have 3 great prizes today for 3 lucky winners on the call today. Those 3 winners will be selected later during the Q&A session, and I'll be announcing those at the end of the webinar. We have 3 $100 Amazon gift cards. So without further delay, let's go ahead and get this webinar started. We're going to kick it off by doing a quick survey question here. And by the way, at any time, if you have questions about what you see in the presentation or any problems with using GoToWebinar, I suppose, feel free to use the GoToWebinar question box there to ask your question, and we'll be answering those right away. So first survey question here is, let me bring it up on the screen. Quick question, what is the size of your company in number of employees? A pretty basic question. We try to find out, kind of the demographics of the audience on these webinars so that we can better tailor, future topics to your needs, and so that we can better tailor this webinar as well to your needs. All right, so it looks like most of the audience has voted. I appreciate that. Let me close the poll, and as you can see, we have a good variety of companies on the webinar today. 21% are smaller companies, and 31% have 1,500 employees or more. So real good variety there. Thank you for voting. So I'd like to first talk a little bit about, the IT infrastructure lifecycle. This little graphic here, you've got the traditional wheel where, some basic infrastructure is just saying, first off, you get a request for some new application needs, some new infrastructure, and we in IT, we have to create, find out the system requirements, develop an infrastructure plan to support that new application. That new application might need 1 or multiple servers. It might need, a new storage area network or NAS. It might just need some local storage. Or it could even be more complex. It could be a multi-site application. It could be a hybrid cloud application. There's so many possibilities today. But we work with, the application owners and the company to plan the infrastructure, and then from there, of course, we deploy the infrastructure, which could be a few clicks. If it's just cloning, let's say, a virtual machine and doing some quick configuration, or it could be, a multi-month deployment, of a new application and a very large infrastructure. So we deploy it, we use it for some period of time. It could be, 3 years, 5 years, whatever the real-world use is for that infrastructure before, in many cases, the application or the storage utilization drive increased infrastructure capacity, or maybe the infrastructure you have just gets old enough that it needs to be replacing. Throughout the life cycle of the infrastructure, we have to maintain it, and then at some point we have to plan for a transition to new infrastructure, and then the process is just going to start all over again, right? So when I ask at the top, is this you? I think just about anybody in IT um, is uh, is familiar with this process and has to deal with it, probably on a daily or weekly basis in some form, or another. It feels like we're constantly in one of the steps, of this process across all the different infrastructure that we have to, be responsible for in IT. So we're constantly updating, our servers. We're constantly planning. We're constantly keeping operating systems and infrastructure and storage, up to date. And I think in some sense, we feel a slight sense of relief after we deploy some new infrastructure, but then shortly after that, the next morning when we come in, there's a whole new, infrastructure project that has to be performed, and we're back on that wheel again. So we're constantly planning our next infrastructure, refresh. And to some degree, it's kind of like keeping your iPhone applications up to date. Every morning you can check and see, and if you're like me, in my case, you have a few hundred applications, and by golly, there's new applications. They need to be updated every single day. And that's kind of how the infrastructure is, in an IT organization. It needs to be updated just about every single day. There's some piece that needs refreshing. So, this might be how you feel. You might be like you're on the constant hamster wheel. I know in my case, for some time we were purchasing all of our infrastructure with the capital expenditures. We had servers and we had storage, and of course network infrastructure, and we had 80 remote locations. So there was a lot of infrastructure that needed to be kept up to date. And of course, the problem with purchasing is, at the end of the usable life of a server, which is typically around 3 years or so, that server, storage, or network infrastructure needs to be replaced. We in IT know that, just like your desktop or laptop computer. It starts to slow down, it starts to break, you have problems, it needs to be replaced, but with capital expenditures, you have to go down and put in a new capital expenditure. And when I would go to talk to my CFO, he would say, well, why do we need to replace this? I'd say, well, it's old. It needs to be, it might break. He's like, well, is it broken now? No, it's not broken now. Well, then we don't need to be replacing it, right? Come to me when it's broken. I said, well, you don't want to wait till it's broken. You don't want to wait till the application slows down. And he's like, well, I don't know. Maybe I do. Because to financing people, they would rather hold on to the money. And then we moved to a lease plan where every 3 years the infrastructure would need to be refreshed, which was great for us in IT. The financing people loved it, but the problem was we in IT, suddenly every quarter we had a list of all these servers and storage and network gear that all needed to be refreshed. And so it might take a couple months to get it all done, and by the time we were done, we were replacing the next quarter list of equipment. So I typically had one person almost working full-time, just keeping infrastructure, up to date, which is really inefficient. And I found this graphic out on the internet, and I credited it there on the bottom. But this really talks about, all that there is going on behind the scenes of that wheel. I showed you the quick little wheel here. Their wheel is similar: plan, acquire, deploy, manage, and retire. But as you can see, and as we already know in IT, but this is a kind of a fresh alarm or reminder here that, hey, there's a lot more that happens behind the scenes as we replace all this infrastructure. You have to establish new maintenance agreements. You have to install, software, register that software, transfer licenses, install inventory applications, make sure that your disaster recovery plan is up to date and still, compatible with the new storage or SAN and everything like that. So it really is kind of a big trap that we can be caught in, constantly replacing infrastructure. And it can kind of feel, like a vortex. We're stuck in this vortex going round and round. And we in IT are constantly forced to, find ways to do things better, faster, and cheaper all at the same time. And we say, no, you have to choose between those. No, we want it all. We want it faster, better, and cheaper. We're asked to be able to do more with less, or at least do more with everything we have, and not spend any more money to do new things like add new applications or support new end users or add more storage capacity. And we must find some way, I believe, to escape this sort of vortex of constant and painful infrastructure replacement. And so that's my challenge or that's your challenge, I believe, that most IT organizations out there are facing today, just to keep everything up to date. And a big part of that is keeping the storage infrastructure and the server infrastructure up to date. And that's why I've been writing and speaking a lot about a new technology that I'm excited about, which is hyperconvergence. In fact, if you look in your handout section here on the webinar, in your GoToWebinar control panel there, you'll see handouts, and there is a book that I wrote on hyperconvergence fundamentals. So if you're not familiar with hyperconvergence fundamentals, it's a very nice introduction to hyperconvergence, and it also talks about Maxta, who is the sponsor of this event. The slides are on there as well if you want to download the slides for this event and share those with your boss or coworkers. So escaping the vortex, how to do it, I believe virtualization is a big way, it's a big step in the right direction when it comes to escaping this vortex of inefficiency and constant infrastructure replacement. Virtualization is a huge step, but hyperconvergence is also a further step. It's almost like virtualization 2.0, if you will. So for those who aren't familiar with the term hyperconvergence, the kind of dictionary definition here is a platform that pools direct attached storage and eliminates the need for a storage array. So with storage and compute hyperconvergence, you no longer need a SAN or a NAS, and that with hyperconvergence, that storage capacity is distributed across servers that are currently in your infrastructure. So instead of having, say, 10 vSphere hosts, for example, attached to a SAN or a NAS, you could eliminate that SAN or NAS and distribute the storage across those 10 vSphere hosts and use the local storage, but still gain pretty much all the features that were in the SAN or NAS, things like high availability and all the other advanced SAN features that you're used to using, and at the same time eliminate the complexity that the SAN or the NAS brings to the data center. Eliminate that management silo. You don't have to have someone to go to a class and get certified to administer the SAN. Essentially, the storage can be just distributed across the compute. But there's a lot more to it than that. But wait, there's more, as they like to say. With hyperconvergence, you gain a single point of administration or configuration for the compute, for the storage, and the virtual infrastructure. So you can do things in one place. A single point of performance and capacity monitoring, a single point of troubleshooting for storage as well as compute and virtualization, a single point of purchase in many cases, and a single point of storage administration along with the virtualization layer. So you're going to gain a lot of simplified storage management because you'll be able to administer the storage just as easily as someone is able to administer the virtual infrastructure. And in many cases with hyperconvergence, the two can work hand in hand. So storage is administered as a single pool of infrastructure, and that pool of infrastructure, instead of having multiple LUNs, you can think of it just as a big C drive for all the storage in the data center. So when you provision virtual machines, you don't have to think about RAID striping and which LUN to put it on and all that. It can just be administered in a much more simplified way than ever before. Also simplified scalability and business agility, because you don't have storage to administer and storage to troubleshoot and storage scale to worry about. And there's really a lot of cost savings potential here. Both in the elimination of the SAN and the maintenance contract that's associated with it, and even in the time that's going to be saved in administering the storage. So some of the business benefits of hyperconvergence are just streamlining the deployment process in the data center for new applications. Of course, you can simplify your IT operations tremendously, because you don't have such a complex storage infrastructure to administer. You can also scale your infrastructure using Lego-like scalability, if you will. So if you need more storage capacity in the data center, you simply add a new x86 host to the data center that host has local storage. It also brings compute resources such as CPU and memory. And then you can scale, really just by adding additional blocks, just like a Lego-like infrastructure, as you will. And it's the software-defined storage, and the virtualization layer that really glues all those servers together. So you can leverage essentially commodity-based, servers, if you will, not to say anything bad about them, but you can use whatever server infrastructure you choose, Dell, HP, Cisco, whatever you choose, and that's going to support both the compute as well as the storage. Significant performance improvements over legacy infrastructure can be gained because with most hyperconvergent solutions, flash is leveraged, judiciously, but there's no need for flash arrays that are, complex and costly in many cases. Most of the times with hyperconvergence, flash is used for caching. And as I talked about, leveraging commodity hardware. So you get this simplified, administrative paradigm here, and you have the potential to redistribute your staff resources. So, the storage admin or the storage group, they're not out of a job, if you will. They can be retasked to becoming, infrastructure administrators, if you will. Elevate them to a higher level. They can administer both the virtual infrastructure as well as the storage infrastructure now that it's been folded, into the virtualization layer. And this allows companies to decouple their staff growth, from infrastructure growth. So no more need to, add another storage admin every time we add another, server admin or virtualization admin. There are a number of questions and challenges, around hyperconvergence because it is still a relatively new technology. So when you learn about hyperconvergence, I encourage you, to ask a lot of questions because not every hyperconvergent solution is, the same. So, you can scale up or scale out, and it depends on the hyperconvergent solution. I mean, keep that in mind. There are differences. So, some hyperconvergent solutions, I talked about, the Lego building block approach, that might be your only option, is to simply add another node. And there might be a lot of costs associated with that. And sometimes you may need to scale up instead of scaling out. So if you're not familiar with those terms, what I mean is scale out is adding more nodes or arrays in a storage infrastructure versus scaling up, which is meaning to add more resources to an existing node or array. So in hyperconvergence, you might just need to add more CPU or more memory to a server or more disk capacity to a server to provide you with the resources that you need instead of adding more and more servers. So that's a good question to ask when you consider hyperconvergence solutions. You also want to ask about software versus hardware. When you look at hyperconvergence, is it just software or is it software and hardware? In other words, are you required to purchase hardware from the hyperconvergence vendor in order to use that hyperconvergence solution? And if so, what's the additional cost, to do that? Also ask about hypervisor choice. Will you be locked into a particular hypervisor if you select that hypervisor or that hyperconvergence solution? So keep that in mind as well. A lot of good questions to ask and things to think about. When it comes to scalability, I talked about scale up versus scale out, but what does scale really mean to you, and what direction do you think you want to be able to scale in? You typically scale, you just think of something growing really big, but does that mean scale up, or does that mean scale out, or both? Do you want the option to have both? And I think the answer usually is yes. But there is a problem with linear scalability, meaning scaling out really. And if we think about that for a minute, many hyperconvergent solutions, as I mentioned, lack the ability to scale up or scale out. So make sure you ask about that when shopping for those. Every company, of course, is going to have different needs. They're going to have different applications and different storage demands. So make sure the solution you select is right for you. So let's look at a quick scenario here. In scenario one, we're doing linear scalability. We're adding, more appliances as we grow. So we've added, one appliance. Each of these appliances are identical in CPU, memory, and storage. But the actual need, let's say, was this. Maybe they had a different actual need. They needed a lot more CPU here than what we have in the appliances above. So to add that amount of CPU and maybe a different storage configuration, let's look at scenario number 2 here, where they just had 3 appliances, they just had 3 servers, and to get the additional capacity that they needed, they were able to do this, right? So in the second scenario, we're scaling up, whereas in the first scenario, we're scaling out. Another concern about hyperconvergence, or something to think about, is with pre-configured appliances, companies that just offer hardware-only hyperconvergence solutions, you have pre-configured scale essentially. So you have to scale in the increments that they're offering, and it might not be from a preferred or approved vendor. So you might be using, let's say, HP servers today, but not every hyperconvergence solution is going to, perhaps offer that brand of servers. With software-only solutions, you can scale your resources and use whatever hardware configurations you choose. One concern about software-only solutions is companies might not always immediately see software-only solutions as a complete solution. And that's why I encourage people to look for, reference architectures, basically a design from the hyperconvergence company in partnership with hardware-based server providers, where they pre-configure hyperconverged infrastructures, and they say, these are kind of the blueprints of what's supported, what's tested, and what we have certified as supporting this much infrastructure. So make sure you ask hyperconvergence companies about what sort of reference architectures they have and what sort of hardware partnerships they offer. When it comes to hypervisor choice, that's something else to think about when it comes to hyperconvergence. And vSphere, of course, leads the pack. It's also expensive. Some companies are trying to decouple themselves from what they perceive as potential hypervisor lock-in, and that's why Hyper-V and KVM, have some popularity growth. Cost is always a driving factor, and so is lock-in. And at the same time, consider OpenStack, and its popularity. So that's what hyperconvergence is. That's what the benefits of it are, that I perceive at least. But let's talk briefly now about hyperconvergence and the IT lifecycle and kind of bring them back together here. So hyperconvergence helps in the IT lifecycle challenge by allowing you to grow or shrink, using a more simplified, building block approach. Whether you want to scale up, make bigger building blocks, or scale out in the number of building blocks, that's up to you. Virtualized workloads are, of course, hardware independent, and they're portable. So you can move virtual machines from, server to server as you replace your server infrastructure. So that's going to make server replacement much easier. But hyperconvergence really helps in the storage, piece of that. So with hyperconvergence, conceivably, you may never have to replace your SAN again. If your software is providing this distributed storage infrastructure and it's just distributed across the compute, you never have to replace that SAN because, well, you don't have a SAN, right? And in my experience, the SAN is always the single most expensive, most complex piece of infrastructure in the whole data center, right? Just about everything's connected to it, everything's built on it, and when you have to replace it, it could be a year-long project, at some companies, to replace the SAN. Also, software-based hyperconvergent solutions give you tremendous flexibility in the underlying hardware. So if you choose to replace, these aging servers with new servers from the same vendor, that's fine. If you choose to do it, a few servers at a time, that's fine. If you want to get a different vendor, that's fine as well. And because the storage is spread across the compute layer, then you don't really have to worry about SAN compatibility and replacing the SAN and syncing the SAN and the server replacement cycles, and so forth. So a lot of benefits, in my opinion, about how hyperconvergence helps in the IT lifecycle. And I know that Maxta also has, their own take and their own benefits that they see on how hyperconvergence helps in the IT lifecycle. And so with that, I'd like to bring on Maxta and talk about, how their solution can help companies of all sizes really help in the IT lifecycle challenge. So with that, let me hand over controls to Arjun. Are you there?
Yeah, hey David, thank you. Thanks for that great introduction. Thanks for having us here also to talk about the software lifecycle and how Maxta is really going to help alleviate a lot of those issues that you discussed today. So yeah, so I'll get started here with just, Maxta, we are a hyper-converged storage company, and again, as David mentioned, my name is Arjun. I'm a technical marketing engineer. I've been at Maxta for a couple of years now, and just want to go over you guys kind of, a few of the things David talked about, and again, how Maxta is really going to alleviate a lot of those issues that you traditionally saw in the IT lifecycle. So let's start with just a quick introduction to Maxta as a company. And basically, Maxta is funded by Tier 1 VCs, Tenaya Capital, Andreessen Horowitz, and Intel Capital. And Intel is also a development partner with Maxta. So what that means is that when it comes to getting support for the latest and greatest Intel hardware, so whether that be the V3 processors or their NVMe SSDs and other upcoming technology, Maxta's relationship with Intel actually allows us to have that hardware in-house and be able to validate those solutions before they're released to the general public so that we can claim support for the latest and greatest hardware from day zero. So you don't have to wait for, any sort of post-GA validation process. You're going to get that support from day one. You can have the hardware you want running with Maxta software on top of it because of that relationship. And so as a company, Maxta's kind of 4 core principles here are to be a flexible, simple, scalable, and cost-effective storage platform. And so we'll talk about these more as we go through the presentation, but flexibility, a quick overview, is going to be any server, any hypervisor, any storage device, and any workload, and that's really brought about because of the fact that we are a software-only hyper-converged solution. And so that gives you that flexibility of software to be compatible with multiple versions of hardware. Simplicity, similar to basically all hyper-converged solutions, we're built from the ground up for the virtualized environment, and that's going to make it much easier to manage and deploy a solution such as Maxta compared to traditional storage arrays. Scalable, as David spent some time talking about, Maxta's software allows you to both scale up and scale out in your infrastructure to meet your exact needs as you grow. So you don't need to worry about, buying a full appliance with, a certain amount of storage and memory and CPU when all you really needed was just maybe 1 terabyte of additional storage. And then again, Maxta is a cost-effective solution. So because you're going away from that storage array and the storage networking, you're going to save a lot on CapEx, you're going to save space in your data center. And there's also going to be a lot of OpEx benefits because of that ease of management and because you don't need to really manage all of these separate components anymore. So kind of, the life cycle that David was discussing with the planning and deployment, the use and operation, the maintenance and transition, just going to go through this presentation and really discuss with you how Maxta is going to improve your life in all of those aspects. So when it comes to planning and deployment, again, the flexibility of our software is going to allow you to do things like leverage your existing hardware to work with any x86 vendor, the vendor of your choice, and to no longer really have to go to a separate storage vendor and a separate server vendor because now you have those converged compute storage nodes. When it comes to the day-to-day use and operations, you'll see that a lot of the kind of, the proprietary technology of Maxta is going to be, first of all, it's VM-centric as other hyper-converged vendors are, but you're also going to get a lot of optimizations on a per VM basis where you can set application-defined policies to really customize the storage to meet the exact needs of your environment on a per VM and per virtual disk and per application basis. And then finally, of course, when it comes time to upgrade or even to just scale and grow your environment as needed, we'll talk about how Maxta's scalability options with scale up and scale out benefit you in this scenario, and also the software agility so that when it comes time to renew your data center or upgrade or refresh your hardware, you're going to see that Maxta, being a software-only solution, is decoupled its software from the hardware and will allow you to renew your hardware without having to repurchase software. So as we move into the first step, right, the first step of the IT lifecycle, as David was discussing, is the planning and the deployment, right? So as I was saying, with Hyper-Converged, with Maxta, you're going to have the converged compute storage nodes. So what that means now is instead of going to, say, Cisco for your servers and EMC for your storage, now you're just coming to a single vendor of your choice. So that could be, any server vendor, whether it be Dell, Quanta, HP, Supermicro, Intel white boxes, whatever you want, you can work with that vendor that's already in your data center. We're not forcing you to go with the server of our choice. You get the hardware of your choice. Similarly, if you have a great relationship with a partner or a reseller, you can continue to use that relationship to get the servers of your choice, the hardware of your choice, from that preferred partner. And kind of another hidden benefit here when it comes to having these converged compute storage nodes is that when it comes time to refresh, or even when it comes time for that initial deployment, you don't need to worry about managing two separate life cycles. That life cycle of storage that's traditionally 4 to 5 years, and the life cycle of compute, which has a faster pace of innovation and maybe only 3 years. So your timelines are now aligned with Hyper-Convergence, where you can upgrade compute and storage at the same time. And again, it's all about meeting your exact needs when you need them in the data center. Similarly, because Maxta is a software-only solution, we're going to allow you to leverage your existing hardware. So if you look at this from a storage perspective, that means that Maxta can coexist with your existing storage arrays. So whether that be just as two separate data stores in your environment, or if you even want to have a single data store, Maxta can actually consume the LUNs of your storage array. Just present them to the hypervisor, and Maxta will actually consume those LUNs and present it to you as a single Maxta data store, which will combine both the local storage directly attached to your servers and the LUNs from that storage array. And then when it comes to the compute side of things, if you're operating in an environment with a lot of blade servers, you can actually still leverage those blade servers as additional compute resources in your Maxta environment. So say you're running VDI, and VDI traditionally is going to be heavy on the compute side, but not as demanding on the storage resources end of things. So if you want, you can have a few of those hyper-converged appliances that are giving you compute and storage, but you can also throw in those blade servers that you had in your data center already, and have those provide additional memory, additional RAM, and additional CPU to support thousands of virtual desktops. And then again, if you have rack servers already, you can repurpose those servers, attach the SSD and spinning disk, and use those for your hyper-converged Maxta storage. And of course, when it comes to deployment, we like to say we are 0 to VMs in 15 minutes because the installation process is really that simple. You're just going to provide the credentials for your hypervisor. Maxta is going to go ahead and aggregate the storage resources and present you with, okay, do you want to use all these disks? Do you want to use this networking? Okay, sure, just a few clicks, and Maxta will install, and you'll have that Maxta data store available to all the nodes in your cluster, and you can start deploying VMs right away. So now that you've deployed Maxta, or the hyper-converged solution of your choice in your environment, it comes time for that day-to-day use and operations, right? So the key here with Maxta and with Hyper-Convergence also in general is that we are a VM-centric storage platform. So there are a few benefits that come there, and we'll spend a lot of time on this because again, this is your day-to-day. This is once you've procured and deployed the hardware, now I have to manage it, right? If you think about traditional storage, you're managing the storage infrastructure separately from the server infrastructure. You had your storage management pane of glass, you had your VMware or your OpenStack or your Hyper-V or whatever, the hypervisor of your choice pane of glass, and you had to manage those as two separate entities. With the VM-centric storage platform that Maxta brings you, you have a simplified management via a single pane of glass where we're actually directly integrated into the hypervisor's management. So now you don't need to worry about managing storage anymore. Your storage is managed directly through the hypervisor. And again, being built from the ground up for the virtualized environment has allowed us to create a very efficient snapshot and cloning technology because everything is done at a VM level using zero-copy snapshots and clones. So what this means is that you have time, performance, and capacity-efficient snapshots and clones. So it'll take, snap of your fingers to create these snapshots and clones. They don't take up any space on creation. And no matter how many you create, you'll see no performance degradation across your environment. Again, because we are built for that virtual environment, we've developed these efficiencies within our platform to allow all of those capabilities. And finally, the last point here, which we're going to spend a few more minutes discussing, is the application-defined policies. So what we're really talking about here is, through Maxta's UI, or even through the vSphere web, the plugin that we have into the Hypervisor's UI, you can actually go ahead and set certain policies on a per VM or per virtual disk basis to really optimize the storage for that particular VM or application. So what this means is that, say you have a VM that has, certain characteristics associated with it, like it needs to be more highly available. You can give it more replica copies so that it can survive more than just one node or disk failure in your cluster. Or say you have, a higher performing tier of nodes and a lower performing tier. You can actually go ahead and you can actually go ahead and set that policy to isolate the VM's data to that high performing node, set of nodes within your cluster. You can also do things like set page size on a per virtual disk basis so that you can align your storage block size with the application page size. And you can enable or disable compression or read cache on a per virtual disk basis so that you're, again, just optimizing your environment on a per VM basis to meet your exact needs. So if we look a little bit more at application optimization and, kind of how that has evolved in the data center, let's start out with traditional storage arrays, right? So with those storage arrays, you had this kind of the pro of being able to optimize the storage for the applications. You could create different LUNs with different characteristics, such as, different RAID characteristics, different block sizes, and you could have, say, Exchange running on one LUN with one set of configurations, VDI on the other LUN with another set of configurations, and your SQL database on the third LUN with, again, a third set of configurations. But the issue here is, as we've discussed, and as is common with traditional storage compared to Hyper-Converged, is that that was a very complex environment both to manage and to deploy. So you had to, configuring those LUNs was not very straightforward. And again, those LUNs were not on a per VM basis, right? You had this construct mismatch between the physical environment that the traditional storage array was designed for and the virtualized environment that you are now operating in today. And of course, with that, there's the expenses on the OpEx side and also the CapEx side of having all that extra infrastructure, all of the extra, the storage array, the storage networking, the fiber channel networking that you had to configure, just, much more complex and more expensive environment with traditional storage. So now Hyper-Converged has come in here and has really addressed that issue of the complexity and the cost, and it's made it, simple to deploy and manage, a few clicks to get your infrastructure up and running, and a cost-effective solution, right, where now you have these converged compute storage nodes. You no longer need to manage compute and storage separately. You have single pane of glass. So a lot of these benefits come with all hyper-converged solutions. But these hyper-converged solutions also give you this downside of presenting a uniform storage pool with fixed attributes for all applications. So now that storage pool, which is presented to you, it may be great for VDI, right? It may be optimized for VDI. It may have that 4K page size alignment between the VDI applications and the storage block size. It may be tuned specifically for VDI, but now when you try to go ahead and deploy Exchange or that SQL database, you're going to see a mismatch there. It's not, one size is not good for all. And so that's kind of the issue that Hyper-Converged has introduced, where it's made things so much simpler, but you've lost that granularity and that ability to customize your storage to fit the exact needs of your application. So now Maxta's come in, and we've kind of recognized that, hey, Hyper-Convergence did something great where it made it simple to deploy and manage, and it brought you that cost-effective solution, but it lost out on that traditional storage array where you could optimize the storage for each application. And so now Maxta, what we like to say is we provide you the best of both worlds, right? We give you simple to deploy and manage, we give you cost effectiveness, and we also give you the ability to optimize storage to each application. But now again, it's all done on a per VM basis with a few simple clicks on a per VM and per virtual disk level. So you don't need to configure LUNs anymore. You just deploy a VM and apply certain policies to that VM on deployment. So now you can see with Maxta's, again, it's a single storage pool, but within that storage pool, you can provide application-optimized attributes to each application in your data store. So now you have Exchange running at 32K page size. The storage associated with that VM is aligned to have a 32K block size. It has 3 replica copies of data so that it can survive 2 failures with no downtime and no data loss, and maybe even enabled compression for capacity optimization. Whereas with VDI, you're now operating with a 4K block size, and because there's so many virtual desktops, you don't really care if you lose a desktop, you just spin up another clone, right? So it's not a big deal. So you only have 2 replica copies there for VDI, and you're giving more capacity optimization in that case. And then when it comes to your SQL database, now you have that 8K page size alignment. Again, you have 3 replica copies because you want to be able to survive 2 failures. And maybe you've enabled read cache for, for all the logging that's going on with your database there. So now you've been using and you've been going through operating your environment for quite some time now, and it comes time to maybe scale up, or even we'll look later at refreshing that environment. But first, let's start with the scalability here. So if we look at kind of what's on the screen here, you have your simple 4-node environment. In this case, all of those servers are uniformly configured. But as I was discussing, let's say you don't want to add another node, kind of as David was discussing with that full hyper-converged appliance. You don't need all of those compute resources and all that memory. Maybe you just need 2 terabytes additional capacity, right? So Maxta's platform is going to allow you to scale up your compute or storage resources as necessary. So when it comes time to add those 2 terabytes, you can see that we're actually able to just add 2 terabytes to one server, and Maxta will consume that in its storage pool and present it to you as available capacity. Now, similarly, if you wanted to add more SSD or if you wanted to add more memory or CPU to a single node, you could actually go ahead and do that too in a non-disruptive upgrade of your platform. Now, of course, there are cases where you do want to scale out by adding a full hyper-converged node to your platform. You want that full appliance with all of the associated compute, memory, and storage resources. Maxta allows you to do that too by simply purchasing another appliance, another compute storage node, and adding it to your Maxta pool. And again, this is all done with a few simple clicks through the UI of adding a host or adding a disk, and a few simple clicks, and Maxta will present those resources now to the pool of resources available in your hyper-converged environment. And one other thing to bring about here is as you're kind of upgrading and scaling, Maxta being a software-only solution and a software-only vendor who doesn't actually sell a hyper-converged appliance, we're going to allow you to upgrade your servers as necessary to meet the demands of your data center. So what that means is that you can operate in a mixed environment almost, right? So say on day 1 you were planning and you acquired all of the Intel V2 processors. But now it's been maybe 6 months to a year, and Intel has introduced V3. You don't want to have to go back and operate on that old hardware. Say you only need one or 2 more nodes in your environment. You don't want to have to upgrade your entire infrastructure to V3 because there's a large cost overhead there. You just want to upgrade as you need, as your requirements demand, right? So with Maxta software, you can upgrade in this hybrid environment where a few of your servers may be operating with the Gen 1 technology, and a few other servers would be with that Generation 2. So you can see here, you can really scale your environment, and you can have this mixed environment to meet your exact needs because of the flexibility of Maxta software. So now the next step, kind of after you've been scaling your environment, is to hop into the refresh cycle, right? So we'll go through here how refresh was done with traditional storage arrays, how it's done with most hyper-converged appliances, and then how Maxta software gives you the best solution with its software-only solution. So with the storage array, when it came time to acquire the hardware, you would actually be buying the combined hardware and software together, even though, from your perspective, it may look like, hey, I'm just acquiring the storage array, that physical hardware. The vendor on the back end is packaging the software with the hardware. So, maybe the hardware would only cost around $20K, but they're charging you $100K because of their proprietary software. So you're getting a non-transferable software license, and you're purchasing the hardware and software together as one entity. So now 4 to 5 years pass, and that storage refresh life cycle is coming up, and you go ahead and you get rid of your storage array. But when you get rid of the hardware, you're also getting rid of the software. So you're not just paying, for the hardware renewal, you're actually paying for a renewal of both hardware and software. So again, there's that large overhead where, hey, all I really wanted was new hardware, but you're going to charge me for all of this new software also. So now the Hyper-Converged appliances come in, and it's actually doing the same thing. It's still packaging the hardware with the software, giving you a non-transferable software license, because with the appliance model, with that Hyper-Converged appliance, they're tying the software to the hardware. And now the other issue introduced here is because the Hyper-Converged appliance is that converged compute storage node, you're generally going to want to upgrade your servers on a 3-year life cycle, or more around that, plus or minus 3 years, because you want to keep up with the latest technology that's being introduced into the data center. And again, compute technology is going to innovate very fast, Moore's law and everything like that. So what you're going to see is that now the Hyper-Converged appliance is almost forcing you to make this compromise, right, where either you're going to upgrade your servers, you're going to extend the life cycle of those servers and not keep up with the latest and greatest technology because you're upgrading your servers on that storage life cycle of 4 to 5 years, or you're going to have to pay more and upgrade your storage on that shorter 3-year life cycle of the servers. So you see, maybe 3 years pass, and you have to, again, pay for both the software and the hardware. So now you're upgrading more frequently and paying more than you would have with the storage array. And you can see, over a 15-year lifespan of how now with a Hyper-Converged appliance, you're actually upgrading your storage 5 times in that 15 years, whereas with the storage array, you would only be upgrading it 3 times. So now Maxta's come in, and we've decoupled the software from the hardware, and we give you a transferable software license. So when it comes time to renew your software, right, now you can when it comes time to renew your hardware, those compute resources, you can continue to upgrade your servers as you used to before every 3 years, and the Maxta software license will actually transfer over to that new hardware. So because we are a software-only solution, we're going to allow you to purchase the hardware you need when you need it without having to repurchase the storage software. So now, your storage array, you were paying $100K for the hardware and software every 4 to 5 years. The Hyper-Converged appliance, you were paying $100K for the hardware and software every 3 years. With Maxta, you're only going to pay $20K every 3 years to renew your hardware, because again, you're only renewing the hardware. That software license is fully transferable across any server in your data center. And so, just to kind of wrap up all of the points that we've talked about here when it comes to solving the IT lifecycle problem with Maxta's software-only hyper-converged solution, what you're going to see again is improve the planning and deployment cycle, right? You get to deal with a single hardware vendor of your choice. You don't need to deal with the storage vendors and the compute vendors. You're just dealing with the server vendors only. And you have that ability to leverage your existing hardware, whether it be the storage array, the blade chassis, or the rack mount servers. When it comes to day-to-day, you're going to improve your use and operations with VM-centric storage that's application optimized also. And then, of course, when it comes to maintaining, scaling, and transitioning or refreshing your hardware, you have that ability to scale up or scale out, and you have the software agility of the transferable software license to extend the license across as many life cycles as you want and refresh the hardware when you choose. And so, yeah, so that's about, all I've got when it comes to kind of the IT lifecycle and Maxta. But just as a reminder, we spent a lot of time today discussing specifically on the IT lifecycle. If you're interested in finding out more about the Maxta product in general and our technology, feel free to contact our sales team. Feel free to browse our website, or go to our YouTube channel and look at a few of the videos we have there, including some more deep dives on the technical side if that's of interest to you. So with that, I'll pass it back to David. Thanks again for having us, and appreciate your time and appreciate the time of all the attendees.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Arjun. Excellent presentation. We've got a ton of questions here from the audience, so I appreciate that. Before we get to those and before we get to our prizes, I've got two quick poll questions here. First one is, which hypervisor do you currently use? And while you're answering that, let me start tallying, picking out some winners here for our 3 Amazon gift cards. All right, most of the audience has voted on that one. Please share those results. You can see VMware vSphere is still the winner, but interesting uptake there in Microsoft Hyper-V. And then one more quick question, and that is, what are your plans for hyperconvergence at your company? Immediate interest in doing a proof of concept or learning more, or 6 months out, more than 6 months, or still just learning at this point if hyperconvergence is right for you? All right, looks like most people have voted on that one. And so with that, let me announce the 3 $100 winners of Amazon gift cards. The first one is Craig Davis. Second one is Kenny Fung. And third one is John Willenbring. We will contact you via email to deliver those gift cards. Congratulations, and thanks everyone else for attending. So at this point, let's go ahead and go into our Q&A. Again, if you have a question about hyperconvergence or the IT lifecycle, feel free to put it in the GoToWebinar Q&A box. We have about 5 minutes left in our time slot here to answer questions, and a lot of great questions have come in. So, Arjun, are you ready for questions?
Certainly, David. Fire away.
All right. Let's see. In general, what's the best practice to migrate to hyperconverged infrastructure and still try to maintain the return on investment on the SAN and NAS?
Right. So, as we were discussing in that earlier slide, you can, there are a few options there, right? You can bring in your hyperconverged appliances and coexist for a while and slowly do, a storage vMotion, for example, to migrate from that storage array to the hyperconverged Maxta data store. Or, you can, again, as we were discussing, you continue to leverage that existing hardware and do the new deployments on the hyperconverged environment. And as you get more and more comfortable, begin to transition over and, start to consume the LUNs of that storage array in Maxta, or, use the blades, compute resources within Maxta also.
Okay, great. So anytime the SAN is up for maintenance, renewal, or is just perhaps it's end of life, or you need to add, additional storage capacity or storage performance, those are, I'm sure, all great opportunities to consider hyperconvergence.
Yeah.
Okay, good. What type of storage protocols does Maxta support?
Yeah, so in a VMware environment, Maxta will support NFS. It'll be an NFS data store.
Okay. Awesome. What's the minimum or maximum number of nodes in a cluster?
Yeah, there's no limit from a Maxta perspective. Of course, we're just going to be bound by the hypervisor constraint. So, in a KVM environment, for example, it would be bound by their constraints. In a VMware environment, it'll be that 64 nodes per cluster.
Okay, awesome. And since the solution is using off-the-shelf x86 servers, how can Maxta improve storage performance?
Well, yeah, so the way Maxta improves the storage performance is we're going to leverage your flash as a read cache, a write cache, and metadata. And so all of that is going to be used to accelerate your I/O performance for both reads and writes, and then leverage the spinning disk as cheaper capacity on the back end for storage.
Okay. Excellent. So through caching and utilizing flash.
Exactly.
Awesome. Let's see. There's a follow-up question to that. What about dedupe and compression?
Yeah. So Maxta supports both inline compression and inline deduplication.
Okay. And I assume it it does the inline without a significant increase in latency or performance because it can leverage that caching, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. What about data placement? How does that work?
Yeah, so by default, Maxta is going to be a wide stripe data store. So that means we're going to place your data across, all the disks and all the nodes in the cluster. And this is going to give you that benefit of, as you scale, as you add more VMs to your environment, you're going to have even distribution of data across all the nodes. So you won't have a single server become overutilized while others are underutilized. And you'll also get, the performance benefit of utilizing every single disk in your cluster, so the IOPS, the aggregated IOPS across the entire cluster. But as we were discussing with that application optimized policies, there are a lot of kind of knobs you can tune within the Maxta system to go away from that wide stripe and actually have data locality, where when you're doing your reads, you're not reading across the network anymore. A full copy of data is on the same node as the compute resources of that VM. And there are a few other things when it comes to node affinity groups and dedicating certain servers in your cluster for specific VMs.
Okay, good answer. A question here about does this replace the hypervisor? So right now they use Microsoft Windows 2012 server. Is it going to replace the OS? Are they going to have to rebuild their servers, or is it installed on top of the servers?
So it's installed on top of the hypervisor. So you continue using your hypervisor, and then you install Maxta on top of that.
Okay. And what about node failure?
Yeah, so because Maxta maintains a minimum of 2 copies of all your data, you can survive any single node or disk failure with no downtime and no data loss. We'll just redirect the I/O path to the healthy copy of data that's located elsewhere in the cluster. And so, the other thing that we were discussing with, deploying Exchange versus VDI versus, SQL, is that you can set on a per VM basis whether you want to be able to survive just one failure or more than one failure by increasing the number of copies for that particular VM.
Okay. And what about hypervisor compatibility? What hypervisors is Maxta compatible with?
As of today, we're compatible with VMware and KVM, KVM with OpenStack layered on top also if you choose.
Okay. Can Maxta use existing SAN storage along with direct locally attached storage?
Yeah, so you can use the SAN storage, either as just coexisting, wherein it's a separate data store from the Maxta data store, or you can actually expose the LUNs from that SAN to ESX or to the hypervisor, and then from there, Maxta can actually consume it into the unified Maxta data store.
Okay, so Maxta gives you a lot of flexibility in that, whereas I know a lot of hyperconvergent solutions, only replace the SAN. They're not going to use the SAN for anything.
Yeah, that's correct, and that's the idea. We're really going for with the software-only solution is to have that flexibility to let you leverage your existing hardware and not have to rip and replace.
Okay, good. This person is asking about VM replication, and is that handled still by the hypervisor when they want to replicate a VM to a remote site, or does Maxta handle that or offer that in any way?
So currently, Maxta only does kind of a synchronous replication. That's at multiple copies of data within a sub 5 millisecond latency. And what we generally see our customers doing when they want a replication solution is actually working with the vendors who are specialized in replication and who have really thought out these solutions from start to finish to be entirely dedicated to replication, not just storage vendors who have thrown replication on top. So, they'll generally be deploying Maxta as backend storage on the primary site and the backup site, and then they'll include a solution such as a Veeam or a Zerto or, Commvault or even vSphere replication to actually go ahead and do the backup from the primary site to the secondary site.
Okay. Is there a way to kick the tires on this without having to go whole hog is the question.
Meaning, I guess, evaluate the software, is that correct?
Yeah, or maybe evaluate the software, or maybe start in a small way. Do companies, maybe they start with one application or something like that.
So what we actually see with a lot of our customers is because hyperconvergence is kind of this, it's catching on definitely, but it's still very new. A lot of larger companies will actually deploy us, maybe in one remote office or for just, one set of applications, and start out with just, the minimum 3-node configuration, play around with it, see how they like it, and decide from there if they want to grow. And again, when it comes to evaluating the hardware, the software, we definitely have options, whether that's, in our POC lab or giving you an evaluation software license to try out on your hardware.
Okay. And I know we're running out of time here, so let's just do one more question, and we'll get back to these other questions after the event. And that is, how does licensing work? How is it packaged and priced?
Yeah, so licensing, again, the key there is that it is a transferable software license, so as you renew, you only have to pay for maintenance. And the licensing is done on a raw capacity and cores basis.
And because of that transferable license, that's really, I mean, one of the big ways that it helps in IT infrastructure lifecycle is you can just transfer that license from whatever server hardware to, whatever server hardware you choose to go with next time, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Awesome. So, Arjun, what's the best way for people to try out or learn more about Maxta?
Yeah, so you can go to our site. You can contact our sales team at sales@maxta.com.
Awesome. Well, excellent presentation today. Thanks so much, Arjun, for joining us.
Thanks for having us, David.
And thanks to everyone out there in the audience who attended today. We really appreciate your time, and hopefully you'll join us on our next event. Have a great day. Bye-bye.